Luke's account of Easter morning, our Easter story this morning, I was struck immediately by three different things. The first is that the ones who come to the tomb to minister to the body of Jesus, one final act of devotion and love, is clearly, succinctly stated to be the women who were the part of the community that followed Jesus. They're even listed: Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, mother of James. They're named, and it's clear that there are several more women who came to the tomb. Not a single man showed up. Now, I've always found that ironic, truth be told, when no small number of Christian churches these days do not recognize women in ordained offices, in part because it's an unavoidable fact that in all four Gospels, women were the first to preach the good news of resurrection. So that hits you between the eyes. Second, in the Easter story told by Luke, if you notice in the story, there is no resurrected Jesus. He doesn't appear, not in this part of Easter morning, just an empty tomb with a stone rolled away. There are two men in dazzling clothes, we are told, who show up suddenly, but it's really unclear who these two men are. Tradition has it that they were angels. But they ask the women, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but is risen." So what the women encounter at the empty tomb in this story of resurrection is not Jesus as risen, but actually the report or announcement claiming the resurrection happened. And the final thing that struck me in reading this story this morning was those who see the empty tomb, who hear the good news of resurrection, of God's love conquering death. Their response to that news was not what you might expect: joyful, dancing, celebratory. Their response is not particularly joyful. Not even a faith-filled affirmation. The women are described as perplexed and terrified. And when they run off to tell the other apostles their response to the good news of resurrection, of God's love, they considered it utter nonsense. As the text says, they considered the words of the women to be an idle tale. And they're clear, they did not believe in the resurrection. Now, the Greek word here in this story can be translated in many ways as kind of understood as a silly story or a foolish yarn, or even you could translate the word that what they saw as what was reported to them was complete twaddle. But actually, the Greek word here, literally in question, in their response, is leros, which literally means, and I'm going to tone it down here, BS. It wasn't that they just thought this was an idle tale. They thought this was bull crud. It's actually the only time this word is used in all four Gospels. And it's intentional. Luke wants to communicate. It's vulgar. It's offensive. The good news of the resurrection was received by those closest to Jesus, who heard his words, who witnessed his healing and his miracles. They thought it was BS. Ponder that for a moment. In other words, the first response, the first reaction of Jesus' closest followers following the resurrection was doubt and dismissal. And let's be honest, unbelief. Not what you'd expect from first team, right? Christians, first team. But if we think about it, it's really not that difficult to imagine the challenges of believing in resurrection, the face the forces of death, in the face of the empty tombs in the world. To be human, to be finite, to be limited, is to know how much we really don't know, if you know what I mean. Every single one of us does not get through life without experiencing that unbelief. And it might come in the moment in which we lose someone we love, someone we deeply love, and we feel the grief, the great sorrow, and we stand before the emptiness of the tomb, yearning for, hoping for the promise of resurrection. But let's also be honest, there are times that we doubt and struggle with our unbelief. We're like those women at the tomb who feel what they feel in the face of uncertainty, of an empty tomb, in the face of death, an empty tomb with no clear answer. We stand with them, like them, perplexed, terrified, and uncertain. Now, to be clear, Easter morning and the resurrection of Jesus, we should understand, is far more than the question of what happens to us and our loved ones when we die. It is about that, but it's far more than that. Easter morning for those women as they came to the tomb, it was more than a question of the mortality of one they loved. It was a confrontation, if you will, with the forces, the power of death in the world that seemed victorious over Jesus. For those women, and even the apostles hiding in some locked up room somewhere, they are so full of doubt and fear and uncertainty because to them, for Jesus, to all intents and purposes, he had failed. He'd lost. Killed, dead, buried. His life, his message, his compassion was nailed on a cross. Body buried in a tomb. Love loses, death wins. Love loses, death wins. Now, is it any wonder we struggle with that question today, with uncertainty and disbelief in the face of the forces of death in the world today? Our world feels sometimes defined by a lack of compassion for others, particularly those who may be different or we might identify as other. There is a sense of banality of malice, cruelty, social media and the news that is actually celebrated, division and anger encouraged. It feels like love loses, death wins, doesn't it? So is it any wonder we might feel ourselves filled with doubt and uncertainty? The resurrection seems like BS. Now, I would posit to you that that's not a bad thing. How many here have seen the movie Conclave? It was up for an Oscar. A number of Oscars, and it follows the story of the election of a new pope after the old one has a heart attack, passed away. And we experience the gathering of a conclave, the gathering of the cardinals to elect this new pope in the midst of the political, the ideological, the theological divisions that divide the cardinals. And we see this through the eyes of the dean of the College of Cardinals, a man named Father Thomas Lawrence, who runs the conclave. And that conclave begins with a worship, and he gives this short homily in which he kind of preaches in Latin, but then he kind of goes off script, and he says this. He says, "Our sin," he claims, "I have come to fear above all others, one sin, certainty. Certainty is the great enemy of unity. Certainty is the deadly enemy of tolerance. Even Christ was not certain at the end." And he goes on and preaches, "Our faith is a living thing, precisely because it walks hand in hand with doubt. If there was only certainty and no doubt, there would be no mystery and therefore no need for faith." So you are not asked to have certainty about the resurrection. You are asked and called to believe in the resurrection, brothers and sisters. To have a faith that even walks hand in hand with doubt and uncertainty. Believe in the resurrection amidst your own doubts, as God's love and God's grace overcomes death and the forces of death when we believe enough to love the stranger, the refugee, the immigrant. Believe enough in resurrection and walk with your doubts hand in hand and believe the good news that God's love, God's compassion overcomes death and the forces of death when we actually love each other despite our differences. Believe in resurrection, brothers and sisters, and walk with your doubt hand in hand, even when life feels overwhelming and deadly and fearful and full of grief. Believe in the good news. Resurrection is not an idle tale. Alleluia. The Lord is risen. Alleluia.